On a bitter winter evening in rural Montana, 12-year-old Luke, a quiet farm boy, noticed something strange near the edge of the woods behind his family's barn. As snowflakes drifted from the gray sky, he saw a small figure lying still in the snow. Curious and concerned, Luke rushed outside and discovered a young Native American girl, around his age, barely conscious and freezing. Her skin was pale, her lips turning blue, and her breath faint. She had clearly been lost and exposed to the cold for too long. Without thinking twice, Luke gently lifted her and brought her into the barn. He didn't have much, but he had one thing of deep value: his mother's old blanket, the last thing she ever made before she passed. It was the only blanket he used on his own bed. Still, he wrapped it tightly around the girl, hoping to give her some warmth and life. He lit a small fire and stayed beside her, feeding her sips of warm water and talking softly, even though she didn't respond. Luke didn't care where she came from or what trouble she had been through. All he saw was someone in need. He didn't do it for praise or reward, he did it because it was right. In that quiet moment, inside a barn glowing with flickering light, a boy's simple act of compassion reached far beyond what he could imagine, setting in motion something much greater than he ever expected. That night, as the wind howled outside the barn and the snow piled higher against the wooden walls, a small fire crackled gently, casting a soft glow on the hay-strewn floor. Luke sat beside the girl, now a little stronger, carefully spooning warm soup to her lips. She shivered under his mother's old blanket, but her color had returned, and so had her voice, soft, trembling, yet filled with depth. Her name was Ayoka. Between sips, she told Luke about her people, how they had been forced to leave their land, how they moved silently through forests and mountains, always chased by cold, hunger, or fear. She had gotten separated days ago during a storm, too weak to call for help. Luke didn't interrupt. He listened, his eyes wide, not out of pity, but awe. He had never heard stories like this, never met someone who carried so much quiet strength in her voice. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "Not here," Luke said gently. "You're safe now." But beyond the safety of that small barn, the world was stirring. Ayoka's people had not forgotten her. 700 warriors, her tribe's finest, were scouring the snow-covered wilderness in silence and determination. They moved like shadows, guided not by maps, but by loyalty, tradition, and love. And as Ayoka rested, unaware of the growing storm outside, fate was already bending toward an unforgettable reunion sparked by the kindness of a single, selfless boy. As the first light of dawn broke through the mist, the snow-covered fields shimmered in a pale glow. The world was still, hushed, as if holding its breath. Inside the farmhouse, Luke had just woken up when his father's voice rang out from the porch, sharp, urgent. "Luke! Come quick!" Luke dashed outside, the cold biting at his cheeks, and froze at the sight before him. Stretching across the frozen hills like a living tapestry were hundreds of figures on horseback. 700 warriors, cloaked in furs and feathers, their breath visible in the cold morning air. They stood in complete silence, no shouting, no banners, no signs of war. Just solemn stillness and purpose. The horses didn't move. The warriors didn't flinch. It was as though the earth itself had paused to honor something sacred. Luke's heart pounded. He didn't know what this meant. Was this about Ayoka? Had he done something wrong? Then, from the center of the formation, one rider slowly dismounted. The chief, tall and dignified, walked alone across the snow. His steps were measured, his eyes locked on Luke, not with anger, but something deeper. Reverence. Gratitude. This was not a confrontation. It was a gathering born of something ancient, something unspoken, respect for the rarest kind of bravery, the pure, instinctive compassion of a child who had nothing, yet gave everything. And as the mist lifted, it was clear, they hadn't come for war. They had come to honor a boy who reminded them of what truly mattered. The sun finally broke through the clouds, sending golden light across the snow-covered land. It shimmered like a blessing, bathing the barn and the gathered warriors in warmth that defied the cold. The air was still, heavy with meaning. Luke stood near the barn, unsure of what to do or say, the blanket still clutched around Ayoka's shoulders behind him. The tribal chief stepped forward, his eyes kind yet filled with centuries of stories. Without a word, he knelt in front of Luke, a gesture that stunned even Luke's father. The powerful leader of a proud people, bowing before a farm boy. He placed his hand gently over Luke's chest, right where the boy's heart beat fast and nervous. "You gave warmth not just to a child," the chief said in a voice like rolling earth, "but to a nation." Luke didn't fully grasp the weight of those words. But something inside him shifted, like a seed planted deep in the soul, a knowing that he had done something far greater than he realized. Then, in a slow, solemn rhythm, the warriors began to ride past the barn one by one. Not in silence, not with weapons, but with respect. Each gave a nod, a gesture, or a blessing. Some left tokens, a carved feather, a hand-woven braid, a stone with tribal markings. Small pieces of their story offered in thanks. It was not a parade. It was a ceremony. And at the center of it all stood a boy who had once simply chosen kindness. Years passed, but the story never faded. Inside a quiet museum in the heart of Montana, behind glass and soft lighting, hung a worn, faded blanket. The edges were frayed, the colors dulled by time, but it carried a power no age could dim. Below it, a simple plaque read, "This blanket saved a life and united two worlds." Luke, now a grown man with lines of time on his face and kindness still in his eyes, stood in front of the display with his two young children. They looked up at him, curious. "Is that really yours, Dad?" one of them asked. He smiled gently. "It was once. But now, it belongs to everyone." And so he told them the story. Of a cold night in the barn. Of a girl named Ayoka. Of a moment when he had almost nothing, yet still gave what he could. He didn't speak with pride, just quiet remembrance. "It wasn't a big thing," he said. "It was just a blanket. But she needed it more than I did." His children listened, wide-eyed, as visitors walked by, pausing at the display, reading the story, feeling something shift in their hearts. Because the blanket was never just fabric. It was a symbol. Of compassion, of unity, of how one simple act from an ordinary boy echoed across generations. And long after the snow had melted, long after the warriors had ridden home, the warmth from that single act still spread, quietly changing the world.